And so the Mesopotamian City Lament is a genre that details really and develops a city's fall and rise, but mainly its fall at great length. And so it's a genre that was generated, and it's an old genre that was like around 2000 to 600 BC in Mesopotamia. And there are 5 principal city laments that are called historical city laments. One is called the Lamentation over Sumer and Ur. One is the destruction of Ur. One is the Eridu lament, the Uruk lament, and then the Nippur lament. So you have these 5, and each of these details a historical event, the devastation of the named cities that I just read at the collapse of the Ur III dynasty, which is really around 1925 BC. So these laments then are a genre that are out there, right? And they have features. So there was a scholar named Chips Dobbs Alsop who discovered 9 critical features of these Mesopotamian city laments. And the most amazing thing about it is, as I was in this class in my doctoral program reading about Mesopotamian religion, and I came across these laments, and I couldn't help think of Ezekiel, particularly when Dobbs also outlined the features of these city laments. So the main features of the city laments to me corresponded with Ezekiel in an amazing way. So the main subject matter of the laments is it's a heavy tone, that's set because they're mourning the loss of a city. And Ezekiel, in the beginning of the book, the tone is set heavy. He's eating a scroll that contains lamentation, mourning, and woe. And so the heavy tone is set right away in Ezekiel. In the laments, divine abandonment of the city is a big deal. And then it also records the restoration of the city with the return of the gods. And of course, Ezekiel has the abandonment in 8 through 11, and then we just saw in 40 through 48 the return. Some other features in the laments, there's strong guilt placed upon the gods for kind of being whimsical and bringing about destruction. And the people don't understand why the gods are acting in a whimsical sort of way. And so the assignment of responsibility is they're guilty, but they don't know why they're guilty. And they don't know why the deity is angry. And so in Ezekiel, you have something very similar as well. Here, Yahweh's not being whimsical. He lines up all the legal evidence of their guilt. And it's kind of underscoring then why he has the right to be angry, which causes him to leave the city. So you've got that. In the laments, there's this theme of divine agents of destruction. So you've got hordes of people coming in who deal a death blow to Ur and Nippur. Well, the Babylonians in Ezekiel are coming. And in the laments, there's portraits of destruction everywhere. The city has already fallen. In Ezekiel, you have portraits of death and destruction on the city, its environs, the sanctuary, etc. And now that's yet to come in Ezekiel. But nonetheless, you have this portrait there as well. And so in the Mesopotamian laments, you also have this creative feature called the weeping goddess. And she's irate in the laments, and she's so upset with the deities who've allowed the destruction to take place on these key cities. And so in Ezekiel, of course, there's no weeping goddess, but Ezekiel is in the role of a mourner, which is why the Mesopotamians, because he eats a scroll that contains lamentation, mourning, and woe, and it becomes clear he becomes what he eats, because after he eats this and gets his call to these hardened and stiff-necked people, he sits and does what someone does in mourning. He sits 7 days in stunned silence, just like Job does.
Right.
And people often miss his point. So he is not a weeping goddess, but he is a prophet who is in the role of a mourner. And so that was illuminating to me when I started doing all this work about him. And then obviously in the features of the city laments, there's a lot of lamentation. And so all that to say to you that topic in the Mesopotamian city laments and the features there completely turned me onto Ezekiel. And then I just saw how it really helped us inform Ezekiel. And it's controversial. Not everybody likes my thesis. So it is, but
that's a good doctoral dissertation when not everyone likes it. So So on that note, I have sort of a follow-up question, and since you've done so much research on it, and you might not have a full answer to give to it, but in light of the fact that we're talking about Sumerian City Laments, which you, like you said, the Earthly Dynasty, 1925 BCE. So we're a long ways from that point. How do you see it here then with Ezekiel? Do you see that because he's in a Babylonian area, that because he's in Babylon, because he's within that tradition, he can bring out these motifs, or are these just shared motifs across a Weltanschauung, a worldview that is shared in the ancient Near East? Is that how you see it?
I see it as the latter of what you
Yeah.
just said.
Yeah.
I think that he takes these images of death. First of all, the city lament genre actually, he didn't have access to the laments, but it's a genre that existed all the way through the Greek period, and then it took different forms. And so what he's doing is he's appropriating language and features of the destruction of a city for his purposes, which is the destruction of Jerusalem, which is basically the covenantal curses, but it's taking funeral themes and the themes of a fallen city that were known. And then he does, I think it's a prophetic book, but he gives its city lament like features, and he's in the poor, he is right there. One of the key city laments was actually created, so that's what I'm getting at. It was a known genre, and then he capitalizes on that, much like, what Deuteronomy does, and I keep Deuteronomy in the second millennium. And so much like people compare it to a covenantal treaty, how Moses utilizes that form to create what he does in Deuteronomy. So I think that there's a similar thing going on with what Ezekiel does.
It's excellent. So good for our listeners to hear this too, because it's just not widely known that across the Near East, these traditions, they span a long time period. And we see it so much here in the Hebrew Bible. And I'm so thankful that you brought that up. Especially with the covenantal tradition. We've talked about that a lot here too in the second millennium. So it's
I know when you started talking, and I'm like, man, Nathan's smile's gonna get real big talking about Hittite, Suzerain, vassal treaties.
Come on, Kenneth Kitchen, let's go.
Yes. So.
Well, and Matthew, you smiled too. So both.
I did.
That's right.
Well, it's because Nathan infected me. He's the one who got me into the ancient Near Eastern bug, and I can't look back now.
Yeah.
But hey, back to the Ezekiel point. This is just another good example of the importance of genre.
Yeah.
And realizing that, all of our shows, movies, and books, they fall into genres that we're very familiar with. And
that's right.
And, even when genres have nuances, it's often building on what is in our cultural milieu, same in the ancient world. And so if we don't understand what their genres are, of course, there are things we're not going to see, things that would have been obvious to them.
Yes.
Just as obvious as any saloon scene in an old Western. It's just like, this is what you have in that genre. Or if you break down the fantasy genre, like Lord of the Rings, of course it has, these type of elements. So it's really cool to hear you break it down in such a concise way, and also to list some of the city laments. I think some might be interested in digging more into that.